Hello, and greetings again from Washington, D.C. It's good to be with you. I'm delighted to welcome you to the third of our 4 short lectures at the heart of the Global Citizenship Module sponsored by the International Association of Jesuit Universities. Our first 2 lectures address 2 questions. What is global citizenship? And how does global citizenship matter today? Today, we'll be focusing on the global climate crisis under the heading Global Citizenship and Care for Our Common Home. During our last lecture, the climate crisis came up as one of 4 negative trends in the world today, alongside major wars and threats of war, new dictatorships and the crisis of democracy, and rising social inequality and resentment. After exploring those negative trends, we looked in that last lecture at some of the transformative potential of digital technology to both spread awareness of global issues and to enable new forms of transnational communication and cooperation. As examples of global citizenship in action, we looked at the Black Lives Matter movement and at recent international women's movements. Now let's move from racial justice and gender justice to environmental justice, a critical focus for global citizenship. In today's lecture, we'll begin by outlining the extent of the climate crisis and the failure of governments and international institutions to address it. We'll then explore links between global citizenship and the climate crisis through a look at Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si. And finally, we'll take a look at youth activism against climate change, with a focus on the teenage activist Greta Thunberg, not a teenager anymore, but she was when she got started, and through an exploration of how you, as students and global citizens, can help to combat climate change in practice. Now to our first point, the global climate crisis. That crisis has 4 prominent features, all of them interrelated. It's a multi-dimensional environmental threat with unequal impacts on human communities, for which wealthy nations bear most responsibility, and for which the response of the international community has been inadequate. The first feature of the crisis is the multidimensional environmental threat. Since the start of industrialization, the release of carbon dioxide through the burning of coal and oil has increased the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, driving a rise in global temperatures, a trend that has accelerated, as we all know, in recent decades. As a result of rising temperatures over time, polar ice melts, ocean waters warm, water levels rise, storms increase in frequency and intensity, and biodiversity is threatened. The second feature of the crisis is its unequal impacts across human communities. Rising oceans and catastrophic weather events have a disproportionate impact on poor communities, especially on women and children. The destruction of natural environments threatens safe living conditions, contributes to food insecurity, disrupts education and health care, and is one of the drivers of forced migration. A third important feature of the crisis is greater political responsibility for wealthy nations. The leading industrialized nations have contributed most to the current crisis through their own carbon emissions. Even today, average per capita greenhouse gas emissions in the United States are about 7 times greater than in India, for example. The wealthiest 1% of the world's population emits more than twice as much per capita as the poorest half. A fourth feature of the crisis is the inadequate international response so far. The United Nations first took up the issue of climate change at the 1992 Earth Summit. Since then, progress has been slow and uneven, with countries hesitant to accept limits on their carbon emissions that might limit their economic growth or negatively impact living standards. The UN-sponsored Paris Accords of 2015 marked a positive milestone. Most national governments embraced ambitious targets to reduce carbon emissions and transition to renewable forms of energy, such as wind and solar, with the goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius in comparison with pre-industrial levels. Unfortunately, many countries have fallen behind in efforts to meet the carbon emissions reduction targets agreed in Paris. Over the past several years, the economic costs of the COVID-19 pandemic and higher energy prices due in large part to the Russian war in Ukraine have slowed progress towards a clean energy transition. In December 2023, the COP28, that is the 28th meeting of the main international governance framework for combating climate change, convened in Dubai to take up these issues. While the world's governments did not take responsibility for failing to meet many of the ambitious emissions targets that they had set for themselves, they did commit to transitioning away from fossil fuels in principle and to taking the important step of funding, if modestly at first, a loss and damage fund to assist those nations most impacted by the climate crisis. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has praised the new fund, but observes, quote, "Our planet is still in the emergency room. We need to drastically reduce emissions now. To have any hope of keeping to 1.5 degrees, we need to massively invest in renewables and end our addiction to fossil fuels," unquote. Now, of course, we're fortunate to have this UN framework within which governments are addressing the climate crisis, even if they're doing so slowly and unevenly. But as with other global challenges, ranging from the wars we see around the world to rising social inequality, we cannot depend on governments alone to lead the way. Non-governmental organizations and citizens have an opportunity, maybe even an obligation, to work together within and across countries for positive change. To help us think about how climate change relates to global citizenship, let's turn to the second point on our outline, Laudato Si and global environmental justice. With his 2015 encyclical Laudato Si, Pope Francis made care for our common home, a phrase original to him, one of the central themes of his papacy. What is an encyclical? Well, really, it's a long public letter. And Laudato Si is quite long. You'll find some key excerpts as readings to accompany this lecture. On environmental issues, Francis has proven more than a religious leader. Think of him also as a leader of the world's largest non-governmental organization, the Catholic Church, with more than 1 billion members, and as one of the most influential, if not the most influential advocates for a values-based approach to the global climate crisis. We might summarize Francis's approach to the topic in terms of 4 linked imperatives: a spiritual imperative, a social imperative, a global imperative, and a personal imperative. First, environmental sustainability as a spiritual imperative. We should not be surprised that the Pope starts here. For Francis, God is the source of all life. Our basic stance as creatures, as brothers and sisters, should be one of gratitude. Francis approaches climate change with a global mindset common to all the monotheistic traditions, and applies it to our natural as well as to our social contexts. The core idea is that God created the earth as a common home for human beings and for all creatures, and that we should nurture and protect it. Second, environmental sustainability is a social imperative. One of Francis's key contributions is to emphasize the social costs of climate change. Rising ocean levels and catastrophic weather events have a disproportionate impact on the poor and vulnerable. He writes that, quote, "We have to realize that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice and debates on the environment so as to hear both the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor," unquote. Third, for Francis, environmental sustainability is a global imperative. The Pope draws special attention to the international dimension of the social question, the fact that poorer countries concentrated in the global south are most threatened by climate change. The wealthy industrialized nations have caused most of the problems and face a lesser burden in the present and into the future. The warming caused by huge consumption on the part of some rich countries, the Pope writes, has repercussions on the poorest areas of the world, especially in Africa. The fourth imperative of environmental sustainability for Pope Francis is a personal one. Francis calls for a more powerful UN framework in which governments move forward together to advance the transition to renewable energy for the common good. But he also emphasizes the personal responsibility of each of us as global citizens to reject a consumer culture that encourages the blind accumulation of unneeded and superfluous material goods. These four imperatives are not really unique to Francis or the Catholic Church. Other religious communities, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, Buddhist, Hindu, and beyond, have embraced the climate change agenda, as well as secular groups of all kinds. They're part of a wider constellation of social groups and non-governmental organizations that are pressing the UN system and national governments to do more. Now to the third point on our outline. Let's turn to one social group in particular, young people, your demographic, and explore youth activism against climate change. The mobilization of students and young people is critically important. It's a critically important part of our global political landscape. Under this heading, we're first going to explore one prominent example of youth activism that most of you have probably heard of. Greta Thunberg, the Swedish teenager, and the Fridays for Future movement that exploded onto the scene in 2018. We'll then discuss the limits of youth activism and address the global impact of lifestyle choices as another way of living out global citizenship in practice. First, let's now turn to Greta Thunberg and the Fridays for Future movement. Here we can really trace a path from individual action to global movement. In 2018, Greta, who was then only 15, began staying home from school to protest outside the Swedish parliament about the lack of progress and the lack of urgency around climate change. Here was an articulate and forceful teenager making the case that a lack of action now violated the rights of youth and of future generations who would have to live with the consequences of climate change. The Swedish media picked up the story. Protest movements swept across Sweden, Europe, and through much of the world, facilitated by social and traditional media, and fueled by Greta's personal charisma and organizational skill. By some count, more than 8 million young people participated in student strikes around the world in 2019, for example, typically on a Friday, which gave the movement its name, Fridays for Future. Here's Greta at a 2021 rally in Berlin during the heart of the COVID-19 pandemic. She's the one in the first row there to the right, with both a face mask and a megaphone. One of the key contributions of Greta and young people around the world has been a focus on intergenerational justice. In her public appearances before international forums, Greta has demanded that older generations, those in power, listen to the voices of youth and take the interests of future generations into account. She famously began a speech to government representatives at a UN climate summit with the words, "My message is that we'll be watching you." And she repeatedly demanded more voice for young people and non-governmental organizations at the negotiating table. Her address to the European Parliament in your readings for this lecture is one powerful example of her rhetoric. One result of her efforts and those of other young activists is that the UN has created a youth advisory group on climate change. So what does this all add up to? This brings us to our next point, the limits of youth activism. Greta, her movement, and many others like it have had a real impact. While youth climate activists do not directly participate in international negotiations, they represent an increasingly important pressure group at the local, national, and international level. With the help of digital technology, transnational activists have generated a global movement effective in drawing attention to the global climate crisis and in raising the call for change. As the Fridays for Future movement puts it on their website, quote, "The goal of the movement is to put moral pressure on policymakers, to make them listen to the scientists, and then to take forceful action to limit global warming." Such efforts, supported by the sophisticated use of digital platforms, have helped to keep social issues of sustainability and environmental justice on the political agenda in national politics as well as within the UN system. While we should acknowledge the limits of youth activism, we should also recognize its potential, given the fact that young people, including all of you, will be shaping the global agenda through your careers, your political engagement, and your transnational connectivity into the future. While the impact of activism can be limited, young people have become most aware, perhaps, of the personal impact of lifestyle choices on climate change, the third point we want to cover here. While the path of national and international activism is not attractive or open to everyone, everyone can engage in everyday practices that can have a positive impact in reducing our carbon footprint, our personal carbon footprint over time. In Laudato Si, for example, Francis suggests, quote, avoiding the use of plastic and paper, reducing water consumption, separating refuse, cooking only what can reasonably be consumed, showing care for other living beings, using public transport or carpooling, planting trees, turning off unnecessary lights, or any number of other practices. Such practices might include repairing rather than replacing old clothing, consuming less red meat, avoiding products with unnecessary packaging, and taking fewer long flights. The example of reducing one's carbon footprint is a reminder that your personal context has a tremendous impact on how you approach global citizenship. You all come from different national, religious, racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic backgrounds. How you think about global citizenship, which issues matter to you, whether racial and gender equality, climate change, or other issues, and whether and how you want to engage is a personal decision, the result of your own reflection and your own personal circumstances. There is no one way to be a global citizen, but climate change has emerged as a critical and promising area for citizen solidarity and action. Our next lecture, the fourth and final in this series, will explore the relevance for global citizenship of a circumstance that you all have in common, the fact that you are all students at Jesuit colleges and universities around the world, members of the same global higher education network. How can our Jesuit colleges and universities advance global citizenship? That will be the question we take up together.